I was born and raised near Hammond, Kansas on a grade A dairy farm. My folks gave me a heifer each year as a 4-H project, so by the time I graduated from high school I had 8 cows that I was milking at that time, and as a result, Connie and I worked our way through college on our dairy herd.
We made a conscious decision to stay here after college. We were commuters, so we were here the whole time. But I was actually born in Pittsburg, where Daddy was working at the time. Wasn't very long before he had a job opportunity here in Fort Scott, I think with Metropolitan Life Insurance. I was very small. And we were here until he joined the Navy, where he became a quartermaster on a troop ship, and then moved back to Fort Scott after the end of the war. And I started kindergarten here. I went to Fort Scott schools all the way through, and then we graduated and were married in 1961. Jim promised my dad when he asked for my hand that he would see that I got a college degree. But he graduated in 64 and I didn't graduate until 77 because I had taken some downtime to have babies.
As I say, I was born near Hammond, Kansas. I went to grade school there and then transferred in the 8th grade to the Fort Scott Middle School, or was the junior high school then, and then graduated from Fort Scott High School in 1960, graduated from Pittsburg State in 64, started working for John Diehl in 63 actually, and when I sold my dairy cattle and actually took a significant pay cut, but I guess I've never been sorry that I switched careers from farming to accounting.
The CPA firm started with offices in the downstairs area of the Milrose building, where they still are. They made a commitment to stay in the downtown area, even though their building, like all the older buildings, are pretty expensive to stay in and pretty much of a challenge. In 1968, John and the other firm members at that time purchased the building and have been fortunate to be able to keep good people in the offices downstairs, but the CPA firm itself occupies the second level, part of the first, I think now, and there's a mezzanine level in there. Just commitment to the downtown that I have always appreciated as a historic preservation person.
The first time I met Jim Banwart Sr. was the first of tax season. I was still in college, interning there, and to be honest, I couldn't breathe because he is a big guy and he's super smart, head of the firm, and so not gonna lie, probably couldn't breathe sometimes in his presence 5 years after I started there. But that said, the more I worked with him, the more I learned about what a great individual he was, what a great leader he was for the firm. He was ever so patient with questions from a new staff accountant fresh out of college, and I grew to respect him very much. When I had the opportunity to meet Connie through Jim, she also displayed that quiet, dynamic force that you don't always expect. And so as we look at recognizing Jim and Connie, I think the best way to explain them or describe them would be that they're a quiet force that through their contributions, both through their time, their resources, and their influence with their employees, and example that they set for their employees, translates into a great community leader.
A hand in the Presbyterian Village project. Actually, it was my mother and her friends, Lois Hubbard and Carol Hammonds and Lucille Linhoff and a number of other ladies that did coffee together. They fussed at me for quite a while that they didn't have any place to move except a nursing home when they couldn't stay at home anymore. And so finally I made one phone call to Presbyterian Manners of Mid-America, the home office in Wichita. That project just exploded. I talked with then the CFO, Gail Benton, and I asked him what it would take to get a Presbyterian manor in Fort Scott, because I knew that they had more than 16 or 17 at that time, retirement communities all over Kansas and Missouri. And he said, well, you have to do two things. You have to find 5 or 6 people who will stick with you through those years, and it will be a while, and raise $1 million. And I thought, oh, well, that didn't sound so bad, but Jim didn't really agree with me. When he came home for lunch, he said, $1 million. My friend Karen Epps said, that's a lot of bake sales, Connie. And Jim said that if I thought I wanted to pursue that I needed to go talk to Cliff Gordon, who was an officer and the son of the founder of the Western Insurance Companies. Cliff had always been a good friend of ours at the church and someone we respected, and so I went over, told him what the need was, and said Jim had sent me to get his advice, and Cliff said, without even taking a second breath, he said, I think we can do it, Connie. And so I went home and said that to Jim, and Jim said, if Cliff says we can do it, we can do it. And I made a few phone calls, but there were a ton of people who stepped up. Some people made generous contributions. Some people served on that board for whatever it was, 5 years maybe, before we were handed off really to Presbyterian Manors. And people like Sammy, Marble, Emery made a generous contribution that got money in the bank accounts so that people could see we were serious. But Sid McCurley was then president and living in Indianapolis. President of was still American States, I think, at that time. The Western had sold to American States Insurance. And Sid was able to get for us 42 acres from the company across from the country club where the village now sits. Many of the people who helped with that project or supported it in a dozen different ways did live there during their time. Many of them are gone. So that was one really exciting project that I was involved with.
It served was on the Rotary group for 50 years, and it was a Paul Harris nominee and accepted the Paul Harris Award a couple of times for contributions to that part of Rotary. I think the Rotary Foundation is a wonderful thing, and they've done a good job of eliminating polio throughout the world.
The Beacon started, the first organizational meeting was on a snowy day at First Christian Church. It's been more than 25 years now. And I was at that meeting, but I was not in leadership of that group for years and years. With that, when it first started, the food pantry was actually a closet at First Baptist Church. And the clothing was on the stage at the Presbyterian Church. Debbie Weil, our minister's wife, and I handed out clothing and sorted clothing out of black plastic bags for a couple of years there until the Beacon got its own space. And so time went by and we contributed, and we sent cans with our postman, all the things we all do. But that's an organization that has really served our community well. Anybody who doesn't understand about the Beacon should help sign people up in November every year, and that they would soon learn there is real need in our community.
Jim and Connie Banwart not only talk about contributing to your community or giving back through your professional life, but they also walk the talk. So it's a matter of not only taking their time away from their personal life to give back to the community, but they also give of their resources, and then of course create an atmosphere with their employees to give back.
The work on the historic district was challenging, probably the biggest project I'd ever undertaken at that time. I love the buildings. I always loved the buildings when I was a little kid, and we would run around downtown. But a lot of the success of those interviews and that research had to do with building owners being willing to let me in. And I learned a lot of really interesting stories. I had a list of questions, and I asked those questions, and sometimes I got really good tours. One day I got a tour up in the building that had been the JCPenney's building in an area that had broken windows and pigeons. That was not so pleasant. A million stories, a lot of fun. I didn't really consider that project work. It's just a very interesting way of learning about our community.
You know, someone famous once said that we stand on the shoulder of giants, and that is certainly very true in Fort Scott. It has provided a strong support system, and through good times and bads. And I've been blessed with some wonderful supportive mentors during my career. Those in the audience may remember some of the names like John Diehl, Bob Crane, E.C. Gordon, Jude Ward, Harold Kraft, and Frank Doherty, just to mention a few of those people who have been really big contributors to Fort Scott. Thank you.